afternoon or morning, wherever you are, and welcome to our session today. I am so excited to welcome you. I'm Molly Immendorf. I am the Design Manager for eExtension and the background tech host for you for today to make sure everything is running smoothly. Our session today is Back to the Future. So hope you enjoyed the Spotify 70s radio playlist as we were coming in. And let's see, if I move forward, we have three panelists that will be sharing their experiences with putting together a mass media campaign. Joining us today are Tom Smith, the Executive Director of the National Pesticide Safety Education Center, and Courtney Weatherby, the Executive Assistant for NPSEC, and Kara Maddox, NPSEC's Creative Director for Communications. I'm going to go ahead and just turn it right over to Tom and share. Let's do a quick share of outline.
Well, thank you, Molly. And again, good afternoon and good morning to all of you. What great music. And I asked Molly, could we find something that takes us back to the future, or at least takes us back? We'll come back to the future, hopefully, with this session. So we're delighted to be here. I wanted to start out with a little bit of fun, because as Molly mentioned, you were listening to some music from my formative days as a teenager and a little bit plus. The other thing I'm finding is with being sheltering at home, I've already missed 2 haircuts. So I've decided I'm going back to my high school hairdo. It's not quite there yet, but I'm making very good progress. And I trust some of you are in the same boat. So Back to the Future, why are we calling it Back to the Future? Well, we're not quite going back to Marconi with radio, but we're looking at radio as one of those mediums that has been out there, one of those multimedia platforms that has been out there for quite a while. And radio continues very strong today. In fact, Nielsen just recently came out with some stats that said radio listenership is up 84% as a result of this COVID-19, which is incredible when you think about it. And certainly radio has evolved over the time, but we're really looking at radio as that past piece. And then when you look at what has happened with all of our digital platforms, with podcasts, with social media, that brings in a whole nother component of using mass media. So before we get started, I'm going to really blast through this outline very quickly, because most of what we want to talk about is at the end. Most of what we want to talk about is sharing some experiences that we've had already with this initiative. Let me talk briefly about NPSEC. The National Pesticide Safety Education Center is a not-for-profit whose mission is to support and serve extension pesticide safety education programs in every state and U.S. territory. So we work with your colleagues in extension that are focused on pesticide safety education. Our job, again, is to support and serve those to make sure they continue to have robust and sustainable programs. I also have another role, as does Courtney, who will take over in just a bit. We're also at Michigan State University in extension. So we hopefully you consider us one of you, and we're delighted to have all of you on this webinar. We started an idea quite a while ago about how we might use mass media with getting messaging out about pesticide safety, and it's very much evolved from there. One of the evolutions is our original proposal went to some of the pesticide registrants who had a need for getting information out, wanted a fairly neutral third party that while they were not controlling the messaging, they thought it was important messaging to get out, and we were looking at basically developing that with the PSEP network. For a variety of reasons that never materialized, but we realized then that maybe there was something here, that maybe mass media used in a bit of a different way could be beneficial to extension messaging. So before we do that, I wanted to throw a couple of little polls in here. And because we're talking about Back to the Future, because we heard that great music, I was inspired to go back into my closet and pull a few things out. Does anybody know what these are? Okay, this you wear it around your neck. And I talked to my younger colleagues. There you go. We're coming in. And it must have been big in my generation. Then I know it died out because my two much younger colleagues knew what the heck they were. So Molly, give us our first poll if you would. So first poll, who has or has had puka shells? And I believe that is the correct spelling as verified by Google or Wikipedia, and we know they are never wrong. And the next poll question is, do you know what 33 1/3 means? Let me tell you my quick story about that. I play on a softball team, and it's sponsored by a store in East Lansing. I think they just went out of business, called Flat, Black, and Circular. And they were started out reselling records, and they moved obviously into DVDs and whatever they call it now. And our softball team has jerseys, Flat, Black, and Circular. But our numbers on the back, every one of us has 33 1/3 as our number. And it's fascinating to me when we play a lot of younger teams, which is easier to do given my age. How many people look at that and say, why are all your numbers the same? So our next poll question, do you know what 33 1/3 means? Thank you for participating in those. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the outline. Instead, I'm going to blast through this. I'm going to try to be finished up by about 1:15. And oh, look at those polls coming in. This is exciting. It's making me not feel very good about myself, but that's okay. So mass media, we talked about old radio. We talked about the new digital platforms, and clearly, Extension is using mass media to distribute content. And we use beyond mass media. We have bulletins, fact sheets, manuals, and many of those at one time all written resources are now downloadable as PDFs. We also do in-person training at conferences and field days. We do webinars. Here we are today doing that. So again, that is certainly a new technology. And clearly we know that mass media is used in extension in the form of websites that are created, social media with Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and others. Some may be doing podcasts. Radio is not certainly foreign to extension. There is a lot of work done on farm radio networks, Farm Bureau. But our idea is going beyond that. Our idea is looking at these channels and not necessarily utilizing just those contents that are free to us, but actually running this as you would any type of enterprise that is really looking for impact. And when I say impact, we're talking about reaching millions of people. We're talking about reaching tens of millions of people. And I'll talk more about that as we talk about the business model. So even though Extension is using mass media, it's been our observation that they typically are not using it in an integrated fashion. And by integrated fashion, and Kara will talk more about this, we're talking about having a campaign around a particular topic area. In our case, we're working on pollinator messaging. And our integrated campaign is using a digital platform as a landing site. It's using another digital platform to amplify that messaging. It's using two radio networks that are national. One in particular will reach 57 million in a particular demographic. That demographic is males 24 to 55. Obviously, other people are listening. So I think what is unique about what we want to talk about, but most importantly, what we want to ask you about, because we're finding there's some challenges with this. We're finding that we are trying to bring two cultures together. And Courtney will mention more about that. We're trying to bring a private sector culture in this mass media world together with higher education. And we have found it fascinating to see how much difference there is between those two cultures. And we're looking for ways and your advice on how to bridge those cultures. So when we think about who our audiences are, I think, again, extension reaches audiences that are we're very effective at our traditional audiences, and we certainly have a desire to go beyond our traditional audiences. But it is, I think, sometimes a challenge. And one of the things we can ask is, how do millennials consume content? Right? We have 30-second sound bites now. We have Twitter with, what, 280 characters, I think. We have little snippets of content. And a lot of us in extension are still used to that long play album that you bought that had an hour's worth of music on it. And that just is not how some demographics are consuming that music. So let me talk a little bit about what our value proposition is. And let me say more about that, in that we are partnering with eXtension. They are actually funding a grant through USDA NIFA, New Technologies in Agricultural Extension. And one of the reasons they're partially funding this is to explore whether or not this has some merit. Can we really get what we're doing? So here's the value proposition. We are proposing that mass media has can be used as an integrated system, and it may provide a highly effective way to distribute content, reach new audiences, and impact a broader range of demographics. And here's why we think that value proposition makes some sense. Extension, as I don't have to tell all of you, has more scientific-based content than just about anybody else out there. But we're not necessarily using a modern strategy or system to distribute that content. Radio and digital platforms continue to rapidly expand. And one of the things that is of value to these platforms would be that type of fact-based content to populate their channels. Now, this is not just me talking about that second point. We're hearing this directly from our partners in mass media. And I mentioned some of those already. But to do this, traditional extension content is not well suited because, again, of how many of our audiences, and it's not limited to millennials, I think we've all fallen into that trap of these short sound bites, these snippets. Social media contributes greatly to that. So how do we take that and transition? And as I said, we know we're already doing that, but I think the key here is, how can you do that in an integrated approach? So lastly on our agenda, how do we make the paradigm shift? And what we're going to be piloting is a business model that employs, again, a broad group of both radio and digital channels. We're tapping into their knowledge base, their resources, their speed of action. And one of the keys that we're finding is, if we can utilize an external platform, which gets scary with extension, I know, or anybody in the university. If we can utilize an external platform, we can get much more robust metrics, because these are the metrics that these organizations want to know about. So our business model is actually including as well support from other private sector entities, basically the corporate world. Here again, we know we're treading on some dangerous territory within university systems. But there are companies out there, like the auto companies, like the large food companies, that are very interested in what we're calling, and what is called, corporate social responsibility. And Carol will talk more about that. So our business model of doing this is a business model that, in theory, will not cost anything to higher education, other than some time and energy to put into this, but it won't be a financial cost as we envision this. Now, that's going to take a bit of a shift with how we do business. And I think one of the things we want to explore today is, first and foremost, does this make any sense? And certainly with your questions, we'll be able to delve into that deeper. And the second thing that I think we want to find out is, we know there are barriers to doing this. Can we come across and bridge those barriers, or are we going to be stuck, and just what those barriers may be? So let me stop there. Molly, I think we're going to take questions at the end, and I want to turn it over to Courtney to talk about what we would call the organizational challenges of doing this, because again, we are bringing two cultures together, and we've experienced, I think, some pretty fun things that have happened as a result of trying to get with these two different cultures. So Courtney, take it away. I don't think you have any props, Courtney, which I think the audience is probably thanking you in advance.
No props, just a couple questions. And I want to start by saying I just lost power and internet for a second. So if I lose you here, I apologize. I hope we're good for now. But yeah, I'll be talking about some of the challenges we've faced kind of with meeting logistics, trying to bring these two different cultures together. You know, they think kind of differently, operate differently, and both work really well in their own world. But we think if they can work together, they'll both get a benefit out of it. So my first question, I'd like you guys to join in the chat and get some feedback, is if you've had any experience with kind of combined meeting like this, bringing two really different cultures together. So maybe, you know, academia and some of the private sector. So this has been a learning experience for us, and we don't claim to be experts, so we're hoping to learn just as much from you guys today as well. Okay, a lot of no's, but also some that frequently. Okay, so kind of all over the board. Thanks guys for responding. So for us, it's a couple challenges, but yeah, it's been also great to learn a lot from this. And because of it can be hard to match these two groups up and bring them together because of the different cultures, sometimes we end up having separate meetings. Well, you know, one with the academia side and then another one with the media side, just because there are so many differences. And the analogy that I think works really well is academia is like running a marathon, while the private sector is like running a sprint. They move very quickly, and I think, you know, that can be a little scary to the university sometimes. We're not used to moving that fast. So the first organizational aspect is kind of the tools we use for meetings and how we communicate internally with one another. So if you could keep on with all your great feedback and let me know what methods you primarily use to communicate with your colleagues. So if you're working on a project, scheduling a meeting, what tools and platforms are you using with each other? Okay, I see a lot of Zoom, Microsoft Office, Microsoft Teams. Okay, so we seem to be pretty up to date on the modern tools for that. But in our experience, the private sector they don't really use those same tools like Zoom and Google Docs and Doodle polls. It seems like they prefer email, a lot of phone calls, their preferred method of communication. So that's been a learning curve. I think the first time I sent out a doodle poll to our partners, not a single person actually filled it out. They all just responded via email with their availability because that's what they were used to using. And we use Zoom with them now sometimes, but it's still, you know, they might not know how to use the camera, or they think they have to be on their computer at the phone at the same time. So once again, just you can tell it's a different culture, different way of operating, and that's something we need to keep in mind when we're working with different folks and scheduling these things. So the next question is, how long is your typical meeting that you're involved with via the university, and how often are you in meetings? Okay, looks like at least an hour. Daily meetings. Yeah, lots of meetings.
Long in there. That was a good answer. Too long.
Right. I feel that. Okay, great. Yeah, this is kind of matching up with our experience at academia, which is very different from the private sector we're learning. Once again, going back to that sprint versus the marathon. Higher ed meetings tend to be much longer. It might be hard to fit 1 to 2 hours in your schedule when you've got so many meetings a week or a day. So that's where doodle poll comes in handy, where you send that out and try and find that rare time that fits for everybody, and then you schedule it maybe a week in advance. But with our private sector partners, on the other hand, much shorter meetings. Even when we do use Zoom with them, it's a half hour at most. Then you might send them an email with a question. You're going to get a phone call right away in response. You know, they'd just rather deal with it right away instead of waiting a week, and get it done quickly with a 5 to 10 minute phone call. And even in their emails, they're very to the point, which I appreciate. You know, like I said, we're all busy, so they'll have bullet points. Here's our goals, here's the actions we're going to take, and here's what they need from us. So it's my head spins kind of watching them work, because I'm more familiar with the academia side, but I think it's amazing. They're very productive. So for us, our experience serving as this bridge between the two worlds, we've become basically translators. Kind of have to, you know, like I said, work with each side separately, make sure they're getting what they need, but they also understand how the other side operates. And just like when we write papers or presentations with acronyms, you can't assume your audience knows what that means. You have to spell it out or define it. Just also like Tom and his puka shells and 33 and a quarter.
A third.
33 and a third. See,
Yeah. It's generational. So you never use generational references when you're giving any presentation. I violated that completely.
But it's good. We learn. We're smarter. So yeah, just can't necessarily send out a doodle poll or a Zoom invite and expect everyone knows how to use it. It might take some extra communication to translate, but I think there's great benefit to going through that extra effort. So some things we've learned is maybe use email to coordinate group meetings with the media team, you know, use what they're used to. After an hour-long meeting with the university side, maybe send out the action items, just boil it down to the essentials that they need, and explain how the university works. They're not used to going that slow, and also going the other way. The university's not used to moving that fast, and I think that's one of the things we learned in our attempt with this project, is that we thought we were slowing it down and explaining, but I guess it wasn't enough. So my last question to wrap up my section is, what methods do you currently use to communicate with your audience? So how are you getting your extension messaging out there?
So while they're answering that, there are a couple questions related to some of the points that you were making that I'm wondering if you could answer. So Colette asks, does that communication vary by industry? And then she gave some examples herself. And the other question is, do you find that they use the tools once they use them, they adopt them? Have you seen that?
I'll start with the second half of that one. I don't think they've really adopted them, because they're still mainly working within their culture, and so we're going to use what works best for that. And the first part, again, different areas of the private sector. I think Tom might be better to answer that. This is just my only experience with it, is working with the mass media, radio, and digital folks.
So I think I can answer that. I think it really depends on the size of the organization. So as you begin to get into the private sector, and we work with some of the large multinational companies, I think they begin to function more like the university functions. We're working with highly entrepreneurial smaller companies still with national footprints though. I mean, we're talking about networks that have ESPN radio. One of our digital platforms carries all the college sports in digital formats, all the major college sports. So these are not small companies, but they don't have thousands of employees. Our ad agency is an individual operator, covers the whole country, and has about less than 10 external national sales, less than 10 national sales force. So I do think you're going to find that the larger you get, the more things slow down. Just a couple of other points that Courtney made. My typical contact with our ad agency and some of our media partners is a text that says, call me, words, call me. If I get a longer text, it will certainly never be a complete sentence. And usually there's no punctuation like capitals in it. So it's just a very different world. And we've been working in this world for probably 2.5 years now. I don't want to say we've been comfortable with it, but we have certainly learned to understand it. And it's just kind of fascinating. So the challenge that we're having is really, how do you bring these two cultures together? Or we're functioning as a bridge between those two cultures, which I think has worked pretty well, but they have very, very different expectations and time constraints and things like that. So I hope that answers the questions. Molly, were there others?
Those were the two that came up through the chat, and I think lots of folks have been answering Courtney's questions. So I think she might want to respond to that.
Yeah, so thank you all for your interaction. That's been great. So to wrap up here, we've kind of noticed extension can be really good at long form comment or content like bulletins or webinars, but I think there's a lot of value in short form or integrating the two. So this private sector and mass media relationship can be valuable with that. And that I'll pass it off to Kara.
Thank you, Courtney. So I'm Kara Maddox, and I'm helping with the communications. I help the two different sectors communicate with each other. So the private sector and your higher ed. And so as Courtney mentioned, we've had some hiccups here and there, and that one group goes a little bit faster than the other group. But we've been able to kind of put together some different resources to help each group stay on the same page. For example, so with our pilot, we're using long form content that's already been published by our extension client. And we are regarding pollinator stewardship, and taking this content that's already been published and vetted, and taking that and boiling it down a little bit into smaller bite-sized pieces, if you will. So one way to ensure that our extension client is happy and keeping making sure that their research is staying theirs and their content is owned by them. We put together a Google Doc so both parties can see that this bulletin was used to make this social media post, for example, or this piece of research or PowerPoint was used to make this interactive quiz. So using resources like Google Doc has enabled us to ensure that the content stays, the validity of the content stays the same. Moreover, we've found that some of the experts in the field that we've worked with, they may not have read all of the bulletins related to pollinator stewardship in the last year or so that came from their institution. So having this shared document also helps them see, oh yeah, this was published by us a few months ago. I didn't get a chance to read it, but now I see that this piece of content has found its way into a social media post, for example. Another way that we're helping to bridge this gap is to also sort of set a communication standard. So, for example, giving updates weekly, at the beginning of the week. Hey, this is what we did last week. This is what we're doing this upcoming week, so that all parties can stay on the same page. I think that's helping as well. Otherwise, you've got one group working a little bit faster than the other group, and so having that open line of communication has really helped. To give you an overview of how we are integrating mass media specifically. So we have our topic, which is pollinator stewardship. This is a topic that hits very close to home for us, and topic that has global significance. And so we chose that topic, and we're working with our extension client to help amplify what they already have regarding pollinator stewardship. So we put together a 30-second radio ad, if you will, to raise awareness of what our client is doing with pollinator stewardship. And the call to action is to visit the landing page. On this landing page, we have very interactive short form content that was created from the long form content that the extension client had created already. And so when the listener goes to the landing page, they have the ability to interact with the short form content, but then each time it's linked back to the original content piece on the university website. And so we're able to track how many people are going to the landing page, so that we can tell our client, hey, you've had a significant boost in website views based on, our campaign. And so that's sort of the gist of it. The creative process behind that is we work with a few digital providers, and they are doing a great job taking that long form content and making it into bite-sized pieces. And so we also have a checklist. So anytime that content is broken down into a different modality, a quiz or a social media post, or even a put together Bee Hotel, for example, all of that new content that is more short form is then reviewed before it's published. So the client always has a say in, hey, can you adjust this, or this doesn't make sense, so that we make sure all parties are happy. I'm going to take a pause. I see a question here. Please describe landing page. Is that the home page of the website? Yes. Yes, it is. And so for this particular pilot, our client asked us to create a separate landing page so that we are able to track the users, the visitors, and that we don't have to worry about trying to get backdoor access to the university webpage. That said, the folks that in the communication department at the university, are going to keep track of how many extra hits, how many extra users that they're going to get. So we're keeping track on our side, and then they're keeping track to see if there's a big footprint there. Looking to see if there are any other questions.
Kara, can I interject real quickly too? That's one of the other sticky areas, because our preference is to use that external landing page, an external site. And the other key piece about that is integrated with everything else. So social media and everything else comes off that landing page. So that is, that's kind of an interesting dynamic, because most universities are not going to, they're sensitive about an external landing page. Let me just leave it at that. We have some other questions that I think ask you about that.
Yeah, so we have, can you give us an example of a landing page? And yeah, I think we can. So, you know, if you were to have an ad that you would see on TV, maybe it's for Dove, and they say, you know, visit dove.com/girl power for more information. When the audience member sees that and then takes the action to go to that landing page, the people behind that landing page can see how many people go there, and then more to that, they can see where within the website they go after that. So the landing page is actually kind of like a gathering zone. It's a place where, you know, you put the content that you promise, like a bee hotel, for example. How to make a bee hotel is something that we're talking about. So the listener would hear this on the radio, go to the landing page, and then download blueprints for bee hotel, for example.
And I would say too, I mean, somebody described it as that's the homepage of a website. I guess technically it is, but I would almost describe it as a website on steroids because of the way it was created. It's not your typical homepage or landing page that you would get on most websites. Because again, it's integrating everything into that. The social media, the radio, the other digital platform that we mentioned with the university sports digital provider.
Yeah, that's a really great point, Tom. So our biggest net for the state that we're working with is the radio. So we have radio that goes across the entire state. On top of that, we have digital providers. So we have one of our partners is Learfield IMG, and they work with the sports networks, sports network websites specifically. And so those ads, they're all going to filter to the landing page. And so the landing page will be able to see, okay, so this person came from a sports website, because you can kind of track to see the breadcrumbs, if you will. I also see there's a question about, is there a date? Yes, you can see the date of when somebody comes. So you can see, oh, hey, we had a lot of people come at the beginning of the campaign, but then they sort of trailed off. So that would be great data for us to know, so we can make adjustments as we go. I also see, is your ad agency building your landing page? Yes, so they've built it. I believe they used WordPress as sort of like the structure. And so they're the ones that are kind of keeping track of it, making updates for us. And then they also have backdoor access to, again, see who is all coming to the page and how many.
And somebody asked about demographics. There are ways to determine the demographics.
There are, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of scary when you get into what our digital providers can do and what they can find out. So go ahead, Carol.
Yeah, so it is kind of freaky. So for example, part of the social media campaign involves Facebook. So there'll be some social media ads that, for example, I keep going back to this bee hotel idea, that'll say, hey, if you want to learn how to create a bee hotel, click the ad and it'll take you to the landing page. So if a user does that, there's a backdoor part of Facebook, I think it's called Facebook Pixel, that will be able to tell us how old the person is, male or female, married, not married, even if they have children. And that all is dependent upon how open the person is on their particular Facebook account. So if the person, has married to so-and-so on their Facebook profile, we will then be able to have that information.
It might be helpful to mention that our main digital provider that's doing all of this comes from a military background. So I won't say anything more about that. We're not sure what he did in the military.
Yeah, and so they've been super responsive. They've been really great partners. They are the ones that are going at lightning speed. They move very quickly. And so I've been the kind of cushion in the middle to say, hey, you know, I know we're still waiting on review checks from our higher ed folks, but you guys are doing a great job. And then on the flip side, I have to tell higher ed folks, hey, I know this other group is going at the speed of lightning right now, you know, just do the best that you can. So again, trying to navigate and be that bridge is what we're trying to do here. Looking to see if there are any other questions. So I have a question about the name of the agency. So we have a bunch of different partners. So Blackhawk Audio, they are our agency of record for NPSEC, and Herb Hoffman is the fellow that we work with, and he is the one that helps us with our radio spots. We also work with our digital providers, and that is kind of a combined group, land.us, explore.us. Those are the websites that this group represents. And they focus on building out communities. One is more in the real estate sector. The other is about how millennials can better get in better touch with the communities around the big cities in their area. And so they are in the middle of launching some of their different websites. And so they're able to share our content on their websites as well. So those are some of the people that we're working with, as well as Learfield IMG.
And just so everybody's aware, again, Blackhawk Audio Group has a national sales force. These folks are what I would call disenchanted network radio folks. They've been in the business 25 years, 30 years, and they've all kind of gone off on their own and work as independent contractors with Blackhawk Audio. So they are ready. I mean, they work with the Ford Motor Companies, with Procter & Gamble, with Mahindra Tractor, Tractor Supply, Bill Knapp's, the frozen food. So it's, you know, even though they're small, I don't even know if you Google them, what comes up, probably not a whole lot. They're very adept at what they're doing. So it's been really interesting to learn. And actually, Blackhawk Audio Group is the one that has brought together all of these other companies that Kara has mentioned. So our point of entry is really Blackhawk, but they're very much a hands-off piece.
I've got a question in the chat that says, are you using the grant to hire the agencies? No, so these agencies are working with us free of charge for this pilot. And so we're very lucky to have established relationships, first with Blackhawk and then with Blackhawk's partners. The grant is to help pay for the radio spots. So we're getting those at very low cost. So the grant is not to help us hire agencies. Are you going to touch on tips for using mass media? Yeah, so a lot of what we talked about today is the merriment of two cultures. And I would say my biggest tip before jumping into a mass media campaign is to ensure that you have and understand how to bridge these two cultures specifically. The private sector with your institution, and how to ensure that they can work together and to really work out your timeline. We didn't realize how long things would take, you know, with higher ed, and so giving yourself extra time is always beneficial.
I would add too, I think when we look at what it might take with higher ed, and I see a lot of chats about can we share, we actually are setting up and have set up a Connect extension site. Molly, I think we'll talk more about that at the end, because we would love to share what we're doing. One of the roles that NPSEC, I think, would like to continue to do, we're doing with this product, is be that bridge between these mass media providers and higher education. Because I think when you really get into this, if you were going to do an integrated campaign, it's going to take about 9 to 12 months with higher education to get everything in line, to get everything kind of signed off. with the private sector partners, 9 weeks. That's probably too long even. So you have a really interesting dynamic there as you begin to engage with private sector, at least with the folks we're working with. I'm not sure they're going to last 9 months to 12 months. And so that's a real issue that we wanted to explore more. So, and we'll have a platform to continue to do this. Go ahead, Kara. I had a couple other questions that I could ask too,
Yeah, sure. I'm seeing that it's almost at the Q&A time. I just wanted to answer another question here. How are you quantifying your results, landing page hits, demographics, from what? This is a great question. So in essence, you're asking, how are we measuring success? So part of that is going to go into the e-field book. So part of the grant is me developing an e-field book to help explain. You know, an hour webinar is not enough to explain the ins and outs of this pilot campaign. So all of that will be in there. But the short of it would be when your audience takes an action. And so on this landing page, there will be opportunities for the audience to take an action. And so that's sort of how we're framing it. And again, we'll give more information in the e-field book shortly.
So there's another question about, do the private organizations that are working with you for free get advertising out of this partnership? So in the case of Blackhawk Audio, and their sales folks, they're getting a commission, not from us, for every ad that they sell. So they are, but we're talking about ad costs of ranging anywhere from $3 to $5 per ad, radio ad. Now that adds up when you're doing 146 different stations in a state, and you can't do one ad. With radio, frequency is the key. So we're talking about running 3 ads a day, 5 to 6 days a week for a 4 to 6 week period. You can do the math. $3 to $5 per ad over 146 stations with that frequency. You know, you start getting into figures like $1,200 a week, which is still pretty reasonable when you look at it. I'm sorry, $1,200 an ad when you take it across all those stations. But we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars, not hundreds of thousands of dollars. Still real money. But we think then, again, corporate support for this would be a way to finance that, and there's interest in that. The other part of that is our digital providers, yes, they're getting traffic on their sites. So for example, LandUS is targeting and designed for 20,000 real estate agents to get information. Well, imagine the information that they could get that is supplied by extension around home landscaping, around issues related to radon gas or issues related to home energy efficiency. That's what they're getting out of it. Now, they're getting content from extension. They're certainly going to get dollars generated out of the corporate support for that. So that's the business model. We can talk more about that, certainly, and we hope that you'll be involved as we continue this journey. We've just started this journey. We are hoping to launch relatively soon, but it is still a work in progress. So one of the questions I had is, and really the reason we're doing this is, how can extension reach new and untapped audiences? And what are some things you're doing right now to do that? And I'm going to go through these questions just so if you need to jot them down, feel free. Again, we're thinking this is a way to get to untapped audiences, and we're talking specifically on one campaign, reaching millennials in urban and suburban areas. Now, we can reach any audience that you want. We have another digital provider that has a database of 685,000 farm families. So we can get to 685,000 farm families on their unique devices and capture the information off those devices, so we can continue to send those irritating pop-up ads that some of you are aware of. So, what are some things you're doing now to try to reach untapped audiences? The other thing that we've touched on and we've talked about is, what do you see as the structural institutional barriers to using this integrated mass media approach to distribute your messaging? We've touched on it already. There's a branding piece, there's an ownership piece, there is a value that is applied to that. And Shannon, in the last chat that I'm looking at, you have to go through university lawyers. I agree 100%. I mean, that is an institutional barrier. So how do we navigate that? And we're not, we work with university lawyers, not on a regular basis, but we certainly do through NPSEC.
So Tom, this is
Yes.
Molly. I've been monitoring the chat as well. And I think that, some folks have been highlighting that, you need to work with your universities or your extensions, marketing and communications, go
Yes.
through the legal if you need to do that. And I think NPSEC, as a nonprofit that works in partnership with universities, right, in service of universities like the extension,
Yes.
we partner with the universities in order to do this type of work. So maybe you could touch on that.
So yes, so other things that we do, for example, is we work with universities to print and distribute their pesticide safety education manuals. We have a service agreement that is very detailed, that lays out what we do. It covers all the intellectual property components. It goes through their purchasing departments and at times goes through their general counsel. So we would be crafting the same types of things for this type of campaign. That is not unusual to do that. But again, I would agree, it is a world that most of us in extension don't typically interact with the general counsel at the university or the legal system within the university. We may not interact with branding, for example. So we understand those are barriers. We also think that the return to the universities on reaching a much larger audience and different demographics that traditionally have been difficult to reach, that return is great. So like anything this is a paradigm shift. There's no two ways about it. This is a very different way of doing business if you're at a university. Kara also touched on, if you were to try this, how would you measure success? I mean, what does that mean to you? Keeping in mind, our digital partners, all of our partners have very sophisticated ways to do that, well beyond anything I've seen within the university system. And one of the other reasons that I think is important is, and the reason that we started this effort is, our mission is to serve and support extension pesticide safety education programs. Many of those programs are struggling financially. They've lost federal support, they've lost state support, and they have lost, and some of the institutional support has been decreased. So we really looked at this as a way to also generate revenue, to create an endowment that could support those programs. So there is mechanisms where revenue share could come back to support your programs, your efforts. The question came up about the link to your landing page. That landing page is not released yet, but as soon as it's open, we'll give you that link because it's still being modified. And we are happy to share everything we come up with as soon as everything goes live. That hopefully will be within the next, the next month to month and a half. And of course, COVID has changed everything we're doing. So you can take that timeline for whatever it's worth.
So Tom, there are a couple other questions in the Q&A
Yes.
that you all could address. So one is, Kim asks, This is old-fashioned and not snippets, but does anyone use news tips or news releases?
Yeah, I think that's certainly used at Michigan State. I think they have a fairly good communication system where they release out, but I think, again, a lot of that is going to traditional channels. And the difference, and hopefully we've attempted to explain that, is we're talking about a campaign where all this is integrated, where you are purposeful about saying, okay, we want to get information out about X, Y, Z. Who do we want to get it to? And then what are the various, both terrestrial radio and digital channels that we can get that out to that demographic? We're not saying that extension doesn't use mass media, have some very innovative things going on. But I think, again, we're looking at quite a different strategy to do this.
Thank you. So another question from the Q&A is, what is the average turnover time when reviewing content, and who is responsible for viewing?
That's a great question. So the average time, I would say, is about a week. But again, that depends on how much content is being reviewed. So for example, we put together some fun pollinator quizzes that folks can take to see how up to date they are regarding pollinators on the website. And so the two quizzes took about a week or so to review, and then edits were recommended, edits were made, and then it bounced back. And so this bounce back action, it depends on, did we hit it right, perfectly, bullseye the first time around, or how many edits has to be done in the review process. That said, the private sector folks, they would want things done like in 24 hours, right? But, higher ed, this is not realistic. We have a lot to do. So I would say a week.
Molly, do you want to talk about, because I think we have a hard stop, do you want to talk about the Connect extension, just so people, we're not anywhere near done with this conversation. So
right, and that's a perfect segue. So two things. One is I just put into the chat a really short 1-minute evaluation, and I really appreciate folks giving us your feedback on today's session. And while you're doing that, I will share my screen to show you where we can continue the conversation. Everyone who's registered for this webinar should have been invited to be a part of a brand new engagement tool that we have called connect.extension.org, or Connect Extension. So that we have groups, and there's a group specifically to continue the conversation on using mass media for extension messaging. We're going to have the resources shared, so the outline and the questions asked are already up here. We're going to have the recording in here as well. But these wonderful conversations that have been started both through the questions and in the chat, I think that could continue on within this group past this session. So there was some great discussion around privacy, and that collecting data. And I think that, that has a lot. The partnerships, the process, when the e-fieldbook is ready, and maybe even as everyone who's either watching this live or watching the recording of it that joins this group, you can continue, and the products that you all are have to share, because this is really an informed community, that could be folded into the e-fieldbook as well. So it's really about building together and learning together. As Tom, Kara, and Courtney mentioned, they're learning just as much as you all are, and together it's where the strength comes. So this is the place for it. There are lots of other groups as well within. It looks like we've got about 70, 80 people already in this Connect Extension group. So I'm hoping that we'll have many more of the 300 that have joined us today, joining in as well. So with that, so the URL for Connect Extension couldn't be easier. It's connect.extension.org. Okay, and that will get you here. And you should have the invitation to join this particular group. And you'll be able to see other events happening all around the US. I also want to put a quick plug in. We mentioned that this was an NTAE grant in our first year of the New Technologies in Agriculture Education grants from USDA NIFA. And we are now in the process of looking for year 2 projects to work on for the grant. So you'll want to keep a lookout for that as well. So with that, I'm going to thank everyone for joining us, and in particular, our panelists, Tom Smith, Kara Maddox, and Courtney Weatherby. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Look forward to continuing.